The CT scan images glowed against the dark screen like broken stars. Dr. Martinez pointed to a jagged white line running through the gray matter of my brain. Her voice steady, but her eyes troubled. Sophia, this fracture pattern is consistent with blunt force trauma. Can you tell me exactly how this happened? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I opened my mouth to repeat the lie I'd been coached to tell for 3 weeks. The one about falling down the basement stairs. The one about being clumsy. About accidents happening. But something in her expressions stopped me cold. Something that said she already knew. The headache started the morning after Thanksgiving. Sharp, splitting pain that felt like someone was driving nails through my temples. I'd wake up dizzy, nauseous, struggling to remember simple words. My vision would blur at random moments, turning familiar faces into watercolor smudges. But according to my family, I was fine. Just tired from all the holiday excitement. Just stressed for my senior year of college. Just being dramatic, as usual. The truth was buried under 3 weeks of lies, but the truth has a way of clawing to the surface. And when it did, it would drag my entire family's carefully constructed image down with it. It happened during what was supposed to be our picture-perfect family gathering, the kind my mother posted about on social media with captions about gratitude and togetherness. We were all home for Thanksgiving break, me from State University, my sister Natalie from her fancy private college, and my younger brother Marcus from high school. The house buzzed with the familiar chaos of holiday preparation. Mom orchestrated the kitchen like a conductor. Dad commanded the living room television, and we kids were expected to smile, help, and maintain the illusion of domestic bliss. Natalie had always been the golden child. Straight A's, student council president, full scholarship to her dream school. She was everything I wasn't. Polished, confident, effortlessly perfect. Growing up, I'd learned to navigate around her moods like walking through a minefield. When Natalie was happy, the house hummed with harmony. When she wasn't, everyone paid the price. That Thursday evening, she wasn't happy. The argument started over something ridiculous. I'd borrowed her laptop charger months ago and forgotten to return it. She had found it in my room that afternoon and stormed into the kitchen while I was washing dishes, holding it like evidence of some great betrayal. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she hissed, her voice low enough that Mom couldn't hear from the pantry. "You take everything that isn't yours and then act like you don't know what happened to it." I turned from the sink, soap still dripping from my hands. "Nat, I'm sorry. I completely forgot I had it. You can have it back right now." "That's not the point." Her eyes were hard, calculating. "The point is you're a thief. You've always been a thief. Taking my clothes, my books, my friends, my achievements. You can't stand that I'm better than you." The words hit like a slap. We'd had fights before, but never like this. Never with such venom in her voice. "That's not fair. I never tried to compete with you." "Because you know you'd lose." She stepped closer, and I could smell the wine on her breath. She'd been drinking since dinner, celebrating some internship opportunity she had landed. "You're mediocre, Sophia. Always have been. Mom and Dad just pretend otherwise because they feel sorry for you." Something hot and defensive rose in my chest. "Why are you being like this? It's just a charger." "It's not about the charger." Her voice cracked like a whip. "It's about respect. It's about you finally understanding your place in this family." Before I could respond, she shoved me. Hard. My wet hand slipped on the counter as I tried to catch myself, but momentum carried me backward. My head struck the corner of the kitchen island with a sound like a melon dropping. The world exploded into white-hot pain, then darkness swallowed everything whole. When I came to, I was lying on the kitchen floor, staring up at 3 worried faces. Mom kneeled beside me, her hands fluttering over my face like confused birds. Dad stood behind her, his jaw tight, with the kind of controlled anger that meant someone was in serious trouble. And Natalie sat on a chair nearby, tears streaming down her cheeks, her hands shaking as she pressed a dish towel to her mouth. "Oh, thank God," Mom breathed when my eyes focused on her. "Sweetheart, can you hear me? Do you know where you are?" I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. Pain radiated from the back of my head like waves. "What happened?" Mom and Dad exchanged a look. The kind of loaded glance that passes entire conversations in seconds. You fell, Dad said carefully. Hit your head on the island. I blinked, trying to piece together the fragments floating in my memory. The argument, Natalie shoving me, the corner of the island rushing toward my skull. But when I looked at my sister, she was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. I pushed her. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the kitchen like a knife. I pushed her, and she fell. Another look passed between my parents. This one heavier, more worried. Dad kneeled beside Mom, his voice gentle but firm. Sophia, you slipped on the wet floor. It was an accident. Your sister was just trying to help you up when you fell. I stared at him, confusion mixing with the throbbing in my skull. But I remember. Headaches can scramble memories, Mom interrupted quickly. The important thing is you're okay. Just a bump. Nothing that won't heal, but I wasn't okay. Over the next 3 days, the headaches intensified. I couldn't concentrate on anything for more than a few minutes. Light felt like daggers in my eyes. Sleep came in brief, restless patches punctuated by waves of nausea. Every time I mentioned my symptoms, my family brushed them off. Stress, holiday fatigue, too much screen time. When I suggested maybe I should see a doctor, Mom would pat my hand and remind me that she'd been a nurse before I was born. She knew what to watch for. I was fine. Natalie had transformed overnight into the picture of sisterly concern. She brought me soup, adjusted my pillows, and spoke in hushed, guilty tones whenever she was near me.
But her eyes held something else. Something that looked like fear. It wasn't until I returned to campus the following week that the severity of my condition became undeniable. I walked into my statistics class and couldn't remember how to calculate a mean. Words on the page seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. My professor, Dr. Chen, asked if I was feeling all right. I had a fall over break, I mumbled, embarrassed by my own confusion. Hit my head. Her expression shifted immediately. How hard? Did you lose consciousness? Just for a few minutes. Sophia, you need to see a doctor immediately. These could be symptoms of a serious head injury. The campus health center took one look at me and scheduled an emergency CT scan. That's how I found myself in Dr. Martinez's office 2 days later, staring at the fractured landscape of my own brain. The good news, she continued, is that there's no active bleeding or swelling, but this type of injury should have been treated immediately. Waiting 3 weeks was dangerous. I sat in the sterile chair, my hands gripping the armrests. My family said it was just a bump, that I was fine. Dr. Martinez's pen stopped moving across her chart. She looked at me directly, her dark eyes serious. Sophia, fractures like this don't happen from simple falls. The force required would be significant. Are you certain that's how this occurred? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could feel my carefully constructed story crumbling around me, all the coaching and gentle corrections from my family dissolving under the weight of medical evidence. I started, then stopped. The truth felt dangerous, like opening a door I couldn't close again. Whatever happened to you, Dr. Martinez said softly, I need you to know that my job is to help you heal, not just physically, but in every way necessary. The kindness in her voice broke something inside me. The words tumbled out before I could stop them. About the argument, about Natalie pushing me, about my family insisting it was an accident, coaching me to forget, making me doubt my own memories. Dr. Martinez listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Sophia, what you're describing isn't an accident, it's assault. And the fact that your family discouraged you from seeking medical treatment for a serious brain injury? She shook her head. I'm required by law to report this. My stomach dropped. Report it? To who? The police, and likely protective services, depending on the circumstances. No, please. Panic flooded my chest. You don't understand. My family isn't bad. They were just trying to protect Natalie. She didn't mean for this to happen. Intent doesn't matter when someone ends up with a skull fracture. Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle but unyielding. And the cover-up afterwards suggests this isn't about protection, it's about avoiding consequences. She reached for her phone, and I realized that the careful balance my family had maintained for 3 weeks was about to shatter completely. The secret they'd worked so hard to bury was about to claw its way into the light, dragging all of us with it. "I know this feels scary," Dr. Martinez said as she dialed, "but sometimes the truth is the only thing that can actually heal a wound." As the phone rang on the other end, I closed my eyes and tried to prepare myself for the storm that was about to break, because I knew my family well enough to understand that they wouldn't go quietly into the truth. They'd fight it, deny it, and try to paint me as the villain in a story where I was clearly the victim. But for the first time in 3 weeks, I wasn't alone. For the first time since that kitchen floor, someone believed me, and maybe that would be enough. The police arrived at Dr. Martinez's office within an hour. 2 officers, Detective Williams, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair, and Officer Rodriguez, younger and more serious. They sat across from me in a small conference room, a digital recorder between us like a small black witness. "I want you to know, Sophia, that you're not in any trouble," Detective Williams began. "Dr. Martinez has explained the medical situation. We just need to understand exactly what happened that night." I told them everything, every detail I could remember about the argument, the push, the impact, the way my family had immediately constructed an alternative narrative, the coaching and gaslighting that followed. My voice shook at first, but grew steadier as I spoke. Officer Rodriguez took notes, occasionally asking for clarification. When I described waking up on the kitchen floor, he looked up sharply. "Your parents were both present when you regained consciousness?" "Yes, and my sister." "And they immediately claimed you had slipped?" "My dad did. Mom just seemed worried." Detective Williams leaned forward slightly. "Sophia, in your opinion, was this an intentional assault, or was your sister trying to hurt you?" I considered the question carefully. I think she was angry and lost control, but she definitely meant to push me. What happened after that? I shrugged. I don't think she meant for me to hit my head so hard. "But she knew you were seriously injured and said nothing while your parents covered it up." The words hung heavy in the air. When put like that, it sounded so much worse than the family loyalty narrative I'd been telling myself. "What happens now?" I asked. "We'll need to interview your family members," Detective Williams explained. "We'll also need to document your injuries officially and gather any evidence from the scene." The scene? It happened 3 weeks ago. "You'd be surprised what remains. Photos, witness statements, medical records. Sometimes people who commit crimes aren't as thorough as they think they are." That evening, I sat in my dorm room staring at my phone. I had 17 missed calls from my mother and a string of increasingly frantic text messages. "Sophia, call me immediately." "The police called. What did you tell them?" "This is insane. Come home right now." "Your father is driving up to get you." "You're tearing this family apart over an accident." The last message had come through just minutes ago. "I can't believe you would do this to your sister, to all of us." I turned off my phone and lay back on my narrow dorm bed. Through the thin walls, I could hear my roommate watching Netflix, completely unaware that my world was imploding in real time. Dr. Martinez had given me her direct number and instructions to call if my family tried to pressure me into changing my statement. Trauma victims often face retaliation from their abusers, she'd warned. Don't let them convince you that seeking justice makes you the bad guy. But lying there in the dark, listening to the familiar sounds of college life continuing around me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was destroying everything: my sister's future, my parents' reputation, the careful image our family had spent years building. Then I remembered something else Dr. Martinez had said. Your brain could have been permanently damaged, you could have died, and they were willing to let you suffer rather than face the truth. The next morning brought a knock on my door at 7 a.m. My roommate answered it while I was still in bed, then poked her head into my alcove with wide eyes. "Soph, there are 2 adults here who say they're your parents." I'd been dreading this moment since the police left yesterday.
I pulled on a sweatshirt and emerged to find Mom and Dad standing in our tiny common area, looking completely out of place among the cheap furniture and movie posters. Mom's eyes were red and puffy. Dad's jaw was set in the familiar line that meant he was barely containing his anger. They both looked like they'd driven through the night without stopping. "We need to talk," Dad said without preamble. My roommate, sensing the tension, grabbed her backpack and muttered something about an early class before fleeing. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving us alone in the sudden quiet. "Sophia, what have you done?" Mom's voice cracked on the last word. "I told the truth." "The truth?" Dad's control slipped slightly. "The truth is that you had an accident, a stupid, unfortunate accident that you've now blown completely out of proportion." "I have a skull fracture, Dad, from Natalie pushing me." "Your sister barely touched you. You slipped on the wet floor." "That's not what happened, and you know it." Mom sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. "The police came to our house last night. Natalie is devastated. Do you have any idea what this could do to her future, her scholarship, her internship?" "What about my future? What about my brain injury that you all ignored for 3 weeks?" "We took care of you," Dad snapped. "We monitored you. We made sure you were okay." "By lying to me? By convincing me I was imagining things?" "By protecting this family from unnecessary drama," his voice rose. "By trying to handle a private matter privately instead of dragging it through the courts like some kind of criminals." The word criminals hung in the air between us. Because that's what this was about, wasn't it? Not my health, not the truth, but the criminal implications of what Natalie had done and what they had covered up. "The police want to interview all of us," Mom said without looking up. "They're treating this like Natalie is some kind of violent criminal." "She fractured my skull, Mom." "It was an accident." The words exploded out of her. "She pushed you, yes, but she didn't mean for you to get hurt. And now you're trying to destroy her life over an accident." I stared at my mother, this woman who had rocked me to sleep as a child, who had bandaged my scraped knees and celebrated my small victories. The same woman who was now asking me to sacrifice my own justice to protect my sister from the consequences of her actions. "She didn't just push me and walk away," I said quietly. "She sat there while you all constructed a lie. She let me believe I was going crazy when my symptoms got worse. She watched me suffer rather than tell the truth." Dad stepped forward, and for a moment I thought he might grab me the way Natalie had. "You listen to me. Your sister made a mistake, one moment of anger that she's already paying for. But this family doesn't air its dirty laundry in public. We handle our problems ourselves. By covering them up? By moving forward together, by forgiveness and healing instead of punishment and blame." "And what about me? What about my healing?" "You'll heal," Mom said firmly, finally looking up. "Your brain will heal, but if you continue down this path, our family never will." They left an hour later, after alternating between threats and pleas, anger and tears. Dad promised to cut off my college funding if I didn't recant my statement. Mom cried and begged me to think about what I was doing to everyone else. But neither of them asked how I was feeling. Neither of them apologized for the 3 weeks of gaslighting. Neither of them seemed to grasp that their daughter had committed a serious crime and they had all conspired to cover it up. After they left, I called Dr. Martinez. "They're trying to convince me to drop the charges," I told her. "Are you surprised?" "I don't know. Maybe I hoped they'd finally understand how serious this was." "Sophia, people who are willing to cover up a skull fracture aren't going to suddenly develop a conscience because the police get involved. They're going to double down." Her words proved prophetic over the next few days. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from extended family members who'd clearly been recruited to the cause. Aunts and uncles I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had strong opinions about forgiveness and family loyalty.
My cousin Miranda, who I'd always been close to, left a voicemail that made my stomach hurt. "Soph, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't like you. Natalie is family. Family forgives. Family protects each other. Don't let the police turn you against the people who love you most." But the most devastating call came from my younger brother Marcus. "Why are you doing this to us?" His voice was thick with tears. "Natalie cries every day. Mom can't eat. Dad hasn't slept. The whole family is falling apart because you won't just let this go." "Marcus, I have a brain injury." "I know that, but it was an accident. Accidents happen." "It wasn't an accident. She pushed me." "So what? Sisters fight. You're going to send her to jail because you guys had a fight?" The conversation lasted an hour, with Marcus alternating between begging and accusing, between loving concern and family pressure. By the end, I was crying too, because I could hear how much pain this was causing him. And Marcus was innocent in all this. He was just a high school kid watching his family implode. But Dr. Martinez's words echoed in my head. Sometimes the truth is the only thing that can actually heal a wound. Detective Williams called the next day with an update. "We've interviewed your parents and sister. Their stories are interesting." "What do you mean?" "Your father maintains that you slipped on a wet floor. Your mother claims she didn't see what happened, but agrees it was an accident. Your sister admits to pushing you, but says it was a light shove, and you're exaggerating the force." And none of their stories match the medical evidence. The fracture pattern, the severity of your symptoms, the trajectory of impact, it all points to significant force. Relief flooded through me. "So you believe me?" "The evidence believes you, and that's what matters in court." Court? The word sent a chill down my spine. This was really happening. This was really going to trial. What are the charges? Assault in the second degree for your sister, potentially endangering the welfare of a vulnerable person for your parents, depending on how the DA's office wants to proceed. My parents could face charges too. For the cover-up, for denying me medical care, for the gaslighting. I hadn't considered that possibility. Will they go to jail? That depends on a lot of factors: prior records, plea agreements, the judge's discretion. Your sister is more likely to face serious consequences than your parents, but it's impossible to predict. After she hung up, I sat in my dorm room as the weight of what I'd set in motion settled over me. My sister could go to jail. My parents could face criminal charges. Our family would be shattered, possibly forever. But when I touched the back of my head, I could still feel the slight depression where my skull had healed incorrectly. When I tried to concentrate on my homework, the words still swam slightly on the page. And when I closed my eyes, I could still see that moment of cold calculation in Natalie's eyes before she pushed me. Some wounds were worth the pain of healing them properly. Some truths were worth the destruction they caused. And sometimes the only way to save yourself was to let everything else burn down. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following month. Until then, I was suspended between my old life and whatever came next, watching from a distance as my family's perfect facade cracked and crumbled, revealing the darkness that had always lurked beneath. The media attention started small. A local reporter caught wind of the case through police scanner chatter and published a brief article in the campus newspaper. Student alleges family cover-up in assault case. No names were mentioned, but in a town the size of ours, anonymity was a thin veil. By the end of the week, the story had spread to the county paper, then the regional news outlets. "College student reports sister for skull fracture," read one headline. "Family loyalty versus justice, a Thanksgiving gone wrong," declared another. My phone rang constantly with requests for interviews. Reporters camped outside my dorm building. My academic advisor called an emergency meeting to discuss media protocols and campus safety. The university's public relations department issued a statement about supporting students in crisis while maintaining neutrality in legal proceedings. But the worst part wasn't the attention itself. It was watching my family's version of events take shape in real time through carefully crafted social media posts and strategic comments to reporters. Mom posted a photo on Facebook of our family from last Christmas, all smiles and matching sweaters, with a caption that made my stomach turn. "Praying for healing and wisdom during this difficult time."
Sometimes the people we love most can hurt us in ways they don't understand. Mental health struggles affect entire families. We're committed to getting our daughter the help she needs. Mental health struggles, as if reporting a crime was a symptom of courage rather than an act of courage. Natalie's strategy was more subtle, but equally calculated. She changed her profile picture to one of us as children, her arm around my shoulders at some long-ago birthday party. She shared articles about the importance of family forgiveness and the dangers of social media witch hunts. Her friends rallied around her with comments full of heart emojis and messages of support. Stay strong, girl. The truth always comes out. People who really know you know your heart. Sending love during this crazy time. The narrative they were building was clear. I was mentally unstable, possibly delusional, and destroying an innocent family with false accusations. Natalie was the victim of a vindictive sister who couldn't handle being called out for borrowing a laptop charger. It was masterfully done, and it was working. The preliminary hearing arrived on a gray February morning that matched my mood perfectly. The courthouse was an imposing brick building downtown, surrounded by bare trees and patches of dirty snow. As I climbed the steps with my victim's advocate, Rachel, I spotted my family's attorney waiting near the entrance. James Morrison was exactly what you'd expect from a high-priced defense lawyer. Silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of confident smile that suggested he'd never met a problem money couldn't solve. My parents had apparently hired him within days of being contacted by police. Sophia, he approached with his hand extended, as if we were meeting at a cocktail party. I'm Jim Morrison, representing your family in this matter. I stared at his outstretched hand, but didn't take it. You're representing the people who covered up my assault. His smile never wavered. I'm representing a family trying to heal from a tragic accident. I'd love the opportunity to discuss this with you before we go inside. I think there are some misunderstandings that could be cleared up very easily. Rachel stepped between us smoothly. Mr. Morrison, you know better than to approach Martinez without her attorney present.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Of course. I'm just hoping we can resolve this before it goes any further. These proceedings can be traumatic for everyone involved, especially when family members are involved. The threat was delivered with perfect politeness, but it was still a threat. He was telling me that whatever happened in that courtroom would hurt me as much as them. Inside, the hearing room was smaller than I'd expected from watching legal dramas on television. My family sat on one side with Morrison, looking like they were attending a funeral. Mom wore all black, her face pale and drawn. Dad sat ramrod straight, his jaw clenched in barely controlled fury. Marcus hunched between them, looking younger than his 17 years. Natalie sat slightly apart, wearing a conservative navy dress that made her look like a Sunday school teacher. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail and wore minimal makeup. The transformation from party girl to innocent victim was complete. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Sarah Chen, was younger than I'd expected, but carried herself with quiet authority. She'd met with me twice to prepare, walking me through what to expect and how to handle cross-examination. Remember, she told me during our last meeting, their attorney will try to make you seem vindictive or unstable. Stick to the facts. Don't let him bait you into anger. Judge Patricia Hoffman called the hearing to order, and the formal dance of justice began. Chen presented the state's case methodically, introducing the medical evidence, the police investigation, and the pattern of deception that followed the assault. Your Honor, the evidence shows that the defendant, Natalie Torres, struck the victim with sufficient force to fracture her skull. Rather than seek immediate medical attention, the family conspired to construct an alternative narrative and discouraged the victim from seeking proper medical care for a serious brain injury. Morrison rose for the defense with theatrical gravity. Your Honor, this is a tragic case of sibling rivalry gone too far. My client and her sister had a minor disagreement. During that argument, the victim slipped on a wet kitchen floor and struck her head. It was an accident, witnessed by multiple family members. The medical evidence contradicts that narrative, Chen interjected. The medical evidence shows a head injury, nothing more. The prosecution wants this court to criminalize a family disagreement based on the word of a young woman who has admitted to memory problems following her injury. The hearing continued for 3 hours, with witnesses called and evidence presented. Dr. Martinez testified about the nature of my injuries and the delayed treatment. Detective Williams described the investigation and the inconsistencies in my family's statements. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on unsteady legs. The courtroom fell silent as I was sworn in, and I could feel my family's eyes burning into me from across the room. Chen guided me through my testimony with gentle questions. I described the argument, the push, the impact. I explained how my family had immediately constructed an alternative version of events and discouraged me from seeking medical attention. Then Morrison rose for cross-examination, and the real battle began. Ms. Torres, you admit that you and your sister had been drinking that evening? I had 1 glass of wine with dinner. Natalie had been drinking since the afternoon. So your memory of events might be impaired by alcohol consumption? No, my memory is clear about what happened. Clear enough to remember every detail of a conversation that occurred while you were allegedly suffering from a traumatic brain injury? I remember being pushed. I remember hitting my head. I remember my family lying about it. Or could it be that your own guilt about your accident has led you to construct a narrative where someone else is to blame? The question hit like a physical blow. I'm not lying. I'm not suggesting you're lying, Ms. Torres. I'm suggesting that trauma can affect memory and perception in ways we don't always understand. Chen objected, but the damage was done. Morrison had planted the seed of doubt, the suggestion that my own injured brain couldn't be trusted. The hearing concluded with Judge Hoffman ruling that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Natalie would be charged with assault in the 2nd degree. My parents avoided criminal charges, but would face a civil lawsuit for the medical costs and ongoing treatment. As we filed out of the courtroom, I caught my sister's eye for the first time in weeks. Instead of guilt or remorse, I saw something cold and calculating. She wasn't sorry about what she'd done. She was angry about getting caught. The weeks that followed blurred together in a haze of legal preparations and family warfare. Morrison had clearly advised my family to wage a campaign of emotional manipulation designed to pressure me into dropping the charges. Marcus called daily, his voice thick with tears as he described how the stress was affecting everyone. Mom lost her job because of the media attention. Dad's having chest pains. Natalie can't sleep, can't eat. This is killing our family, Sophia. Extended relatives reached out with carefully worded messages about forgiveness and moving forward. My grandmother, Mom's mother, sent a handwritten letter that arrived on expensive stationery. Sweetheart, I know you're hurting, but destroying your sister won't heal your pain. Real strength is in forgiveness, not revenge. The social media campaign intensified as well. Someone created a private Facebook group called Support the Torres Family that I only learned about when a friend screenshot some of the posts. Hundreds of family friends, neighbors, and acquaintances had joined to share their support for my family and their shock at my vindictive behavior. I've known this family for 20 years. These are good people going through hell because of one daughter's mental health crisis. Natalie Torres is one of the sweetest girls I know. Anyone who believes she would intentionally hurt her sister clearly doesn't know her. This is what happens when you don't get proper mental health treatment. This poor girl is destroying her own family. The narrative was consistent and damaging. I was mentally ill, vindictive, and tearing apart an innocent family with false accusations. But Chen had warned me this would happen. Family assault cases are always ugly, she'd explained. The defense strategy is usually to isolate the victim and make them seem unstable. The pressure can be overwhelming. She was right. The isolation was the worst part. Friends from high school stopped returning my calls after seeing the social media posts. Professors who had once been warm and encouraging now seemed distant and uncomfortable. Even my roommate started spending more time at her boyfriend's place, leaving me alone with my thoughts and fears. The only thing that kept me grounded was my weekly appointments with Dr. Martinez and the trauma counselor she'd referred me to, Dr. Patricia Wong. These sessions became my lifeline, the only place where my version of events wasn't questioned or analyzed for ulterior motives. Your family is using classic manipulation tactics, Dr. Wong explained during one particularly difficult session. They're trying to make you responsible for their emotional reactions to consequences they created. But Marcus is innocent in all this. He's just a kid. And that's exactly why they're using him. They know you care about his well-being, so they're making his pain your responsibility. Sometimes I wonder if I should just drop it all, let things go back to normal. What would normal look like, Sophia? I guess pretending it never happened, going back to family dinners and holidays and acting like everything is fine, while knowing that your sister faced no consequences for fracturing your skull and your parents faced no consequences for covering it up. When she put it like that, the answer was obvious. Normal wasn't possible anymore because normal had been built on a lie. The only way forward was through the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The breakthrough came 3 weeks before the trial was scheduled to begin. Detective Williams called me on a Tuesday evening, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "Sophia, we need to meet. Something significant has come up in the investigation." We met the next morning at a coffee shop near campus. Williams sat across from me with a manila folder, her expression grim but determined. "We've been reviewing your family's electronic communications from around the time of the assault," she began. "Text messages, emails, phone records. Your sister's phone company provided us with deleted text conversations." My heart began to race. "What did you find?" Williams opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. "These are text messages between your sister and her boyfriend from the night of the assault." She slid the first page across the table. The messages were time-stamped, starting at 11:47 p.m. on Thanksgiving night, about 2 hours after I'd been injured. Natalie: "I fucked up so bad." Jake: "What happened, babe?" Natalie: "Got in a fight with Sophia. I lost it and pushed her. She hit her head really hard." Jake: "Shit, is she okay?" Natalie: "I don't know. She was unconscious for like 5 minutes. My parents are freaking out." Jake: "Did you call 911? "No. Dad says we handle this as a family. But Jake, there was so much blood." Jesus, maybe she needs a hospital? Mom checked her pupils and stuff, says she seems okay now, but I keep thinking about that sound when her head hit the counter. What sound? Like a coconut cracking. I can't stop hearing it. I stared at the messages, my hands trembling slightly. Here was the truth, preserved in digital amber. Natalie knew she'd seriously injured me. She knew I needed medical attention, and she'd participated in the cover-up anyway. Williams turned to the next page. It gets worse. The next set of messages was from 2 days later, when my symptoms had worsened, but my family was still insisting I was fine. Jake: "How's your sister doing?" Natalie: "She's been complaining about headaches and feeling dizzy. Mom thinks she's being dramatic." Dude, that sounds like a concussion. Yeah, I know. I looked it up. She has like all the symptoms. Shouldn't she see a doctor? Probably, but if she goes to a doctor, they'll ask questions about how it happened. So tell them she fell. Dad already told her that's what happened. I think she's starting to believe it. Good, better for everyone if this just goes away. I feel so guilty though. What if she has permanent damage? Then you deal with it when it happens. Right now, you just need to make sure this doesn't blow up your future. The casual callousness of it took my breath away. My sister had known I was seriously injured, had researched my symptoms, had understood that I needed medical attention, and she'd chosen her own future over my health. "There's one more conversation," William said quietly, "from about a week later, when you started asking more questions about what happened." This set of messages was the most damning yet. Natalie: "Sophia keeps asking weird questions about that night, like she's trying to remember something." Jake: "What kind of questions?" "She asked me why I was crying when she woke up, and she said she thought she remembered me pushing her." "What did you tell her?" "Same thing Mom and Dad told her, that she slipped and I was just upset about the accident." "Do you think she believes it?" "I don't know. She seems confused about everything."
The head injury definitely messed with her memory. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe, but I hate lying to her face every day. It's not lying, it's protecting your family. By gaslighting my brain-injured sister? By handling a bad situation the best way you can? Your parents are right. Some things are better kept private. I finished reading and looked up at Williams, who was watching my reaction carefully. This changes everything, I said. It proves premeditation in the cover-up. It shows your sister knew the extent of your injuries and chose to conceal them. It demonstrates a pattern of deliberate deception. Will this be admissible in court? Absolutely. Your sister's boyfriend has already been served with a subpoena. These messages are smoking gun evidence. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like hope. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the carefully crafted narrative of family accident and mental instability, it was all about to crumble under the weight of digital evidence. What happens next? We present this to the prosecutor. Given this new evidence, I suspect they'll want to add charges: conspiracy, obstruction of justice, possibly even attempted witness tampering. Additional charges. The weight of what my family had done was finally being recognized by the legal system. This wasn't just a sibling squabble that got out of hand. It was a calculated cover-up that had put my life at risk. That evening, I called Dr. Wong to process the day's revelations. "How do you feel about seeing your sister's true thoughts?" she asked. "Validated," I said immediately. For weeks, I've been questioning my own memory, wondering if I was being too harsh or vindictive. But seeing her own words, knowing that she knew how badly she'd hurt me and chose to lie anyway, it confirms that your instincts about what happened were correct. More than that, it shows that the gaslighting was intentional. She didn't just go along with my parents' story, she helped create it. She watched me suffer and chose her own protection over my well-being. That must be painful to accept about someone you love. It is, but it's also freeing. I don't have to feel guilty anymore about pursuing this. I don't have to wonder if I'm being unfair. She made her choices, and now she gets to face the consequences. The text messages were released to Morrison's office the next day as part of the discovery process. Within hours, my phone started ringing with frantic calls from family members. The carefully constructed narrative was falling apart, and they knew it. Mom's voicemail was barely coherent through her tears. "Sophia, please, you have to understand. Natalie was scared. She's just a young girl who made a mistake. These text messages make her sound terrible, but you know her heart. You know she loves you." Dad's message was more direct. "Those messages are private conversations taken out of context. Don't let the prosecutor use your sister's private fears against her. This is still our family business." But it was Marcus's call that broke my heart. He didn't leave a voicemail, but when I finally answered, his voice was small and lost. "Sophia?" I read the messages.
The police showed them to Mom and Dad. "Marcus, did Natalie really know you were that hurt? Did she really help lie about it?" The pain in his voice was unbearable. Marcus had idolized Natalie our whole lives. She was his cool older sister, the one who drove him to soccer practice and helped him with his college applications. Learning that she was capable of such calculated deception was shattering his understanding of his own family. "Yes," I said quietly, "she knew." "But why? Why would she do that to you?" "I don't know, Marcus. I wish I did." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, older somehow. "I'm sorry, Sophia. I'm sorry I tried to make you drop the charges. I didn't understand what really happened." "You don't have to apologize. You were trying to protect your family. But you're my family too, and they hurt you. They all hurt you." After he hung up, I sat in my dorm room and cried. Not from pain or anger, but from relief. Finally, someone else could see the truth. Finally, I wasn't alone in my family anymore. The trial was now 3 weeks away, and Morrison had requested an emergency meeting with the prosecutor's office. The smart money said he was going to try to negotiate a plea deal before the text messages could be presented to a jury, but Chen had other plans. When she called that afternoon, her voice was crisp with professional satisfaction. Morrison wants a deal, but we're not interested in anything less than the full charges. Your sister's messages show clear consciousness of guilt and deliberate obstruction. We're adding conspiracy charges against all 3 family members. All 3? The parents participated in the cover-up and deliberately prevented you from receiving medical care. That's conspiracy to obstruct justice and reckless endangerment. My parents would face criminal charges after all. The careful distance they'd maintained from the actual assault wouldn't protect them from the consequences of the cover-up. What does this mean for the trial? It means we're going in strong. The defense's only option now is to attack your credibility or claim the messages are somehow fabricated. But digital evidence is hard to fake, and your sister's boyfriend has already confirmed the authenticity in his interview. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the storm I'd been dreading was finally here. The truth was about to come out in the most public way possible. My family's perfect facade would be stripped away in front of a jury, the media, and everyone who had ever believed their carefully crafted lies. But for the first time since that Thanksgiving night, I wasn't afraid of the storm. I was ready to stand in the center of it and let the truth be my shelter. The trial began on a Monday morning in late March, when the last patches of snow were finally melting and the courthouse steps were slick with early spring rain. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind cycling through everything that had led to this moment. 3 months had passed since that first visit to Dr. Martinez, 3 months of legal preparations and family warfare that had transformed me from a confused college student into someone I barely recognized. As I walked into the courthouse with Chen and my victim's advocate, I caught sight of the media circus that had assembled outside. Local news crews, newspaper reporters, even a freelance journalist who'd been following the case for a national magazine about family violence. The story had grown beyond our small college town, becoming a symbol of something larger about family loyalty, institutional cover-ups, and the courage it takes to speak truth to power. Inside, the courtroom was packed. I recognized many faces from my childhood, neighbors, family friends, parents of kids I'd gone to school with. Some had come to support my family, their expressions ranging from sympathetic to hostile as I passed. Others seemed genuinely curious about the truth, their eyes following me with a mixture of concern and fascination. My family sat in their designated area with Morrison and his team. Mom wore a black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which, in many ways, she was. The funeral of the family image she'd spent decades constructing. Dad sat rigidly beside her, his face a mask of controlled fury that I knew meant he was barely holding himself together. Marcus sat slightly apart from them, and when our eyes met across the courtroom, he gave me the slightest nod of acknowledgement. Natalie looked different than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the confident, polished young woman who'd always commanded attention wherever she went. Her hair was pulled back severely, her face pale and drawn, her eyes darting nervously around the courtroom. She kept fidgeting with her hands, twisting a plain silver ring that I didn't recognize. Judge Hoffman called the court to order, and Chen rose to deliver her opening statement. She was magnificent, clear, precise, and devastating in her presentation of the facts. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about 3 things: violence, deception, and the courage it takes to demand justice when the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones you need protection from. The evidence will show that on Thanksgiving night, Natalie Torres assaulted her sister with sufficient force to fracture her skull. But the violence was just the beginning. What followed was a coordinated campaign of deception designed to cover up that assault and deny the victim the medical care she desperately needed. She walked the jury through the timeline methodically: the argument in the kitchen, the assault itself, the immediate cover-up, the weeks of gaslighting that followed, the delayed medical treatment that could have resulted in permanent brain damage or death. The defense will tell you this was a family accident, a private matter that should have stayed private. But when someone suffers a skull fracture and their own family conspires to deny them medical care, it stops being a private matter. It becomes a crime. Multiple crimes, in fact, that endangered the victim's life and violated her fundamental right to safety and medical treatment. When she finished, the courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of someone crying. I thought it might be Mom, but when I glanced over, I saw it was actually one of the jurors, an older woman whose own expression suggested she understood exactly what Chen was describing. Morrison's opening was smooth and polished, exactly what I'd expected from someone of his reputation. He painted a picture of a tragic family accident blown out of proportion by overzealous prosecutors and an emotionally unstable young woman seeking attention. "This case should never have come to trial," he began, his voice warm and reasonable. "What we have here is a family dispute that escalated into a tragic accident. Natalie Torres and her sister had an argument, the kind of argument that happens in families every day. During that argument, Sophia Torres slipped on a wet kitchen floor and struck her head. It was an accident, witnessed by multiple family members, and it was treated as such." He acknowledged that Natalie had pushed me, but characterized it as a light shove during a heated argument, the kind of physical contact that happens between siblings all the time. The serious injury was the result of an unfortunate slip on a wet floor, not intentional violence. The prosecution wants you to criminalize a family's attempt to heal privately from a tragic accident. They want you to send a young woman to prison because her sister's conspiracy theories have been validated by prosecutors looking for a case to try. It was a skillful performance, and I could see some of the jurors nodding along. Morrison was doing exactly what Chen had warned me he would do, making me seem unstable and vindictive while painting my family as victims of prosecutorial overreach. But then Chen called her first witness, and the real battle began. Dr. Martinez took the stand wearing the same serious expression she'd worn during that first appointment when everything changed. Under Chen's questioning, she methodically destroyed the accident narrative with medical facts and expert analysis. "The fracture pattern is inconsistent with a fall onto a flat surface," she explained, using enlarged photos of my CT scans to illustrate her points. "The trajectory of impact suggests the victim's head struck a sharp corner with significant force. The injury is characteristic of a direct blow rather than a fall." Morrison tried to shake her testimony during cross-examination, suggesting that medical evidence could be interpreted multiple ways and that accident scenarios could produce similar injuries. But Dr. Martinez was unflappable, backing up every statement with peer-reviewed research and decades of experience treating head trauma. "In my professional opinion," she concluded, "this injury required significant force applied in a specific direction. It is not consistent with slipping on a wet floor." Detective Williams followed, walking the jury through the investigation with methodical precision. She described the inconsistencies in my family's statements, the delayed reporting, and the pattern of deception that had emerged during interviews. But the real bombshell came when Chen introduced the text messages. "Your Honor, the people would like to present Exhibit A7 through A15, text message conversations between the defendant and her boyfriend from the night of the assault through the following week." Morrison objected strenuously, arguing that private communications were taken out of text and violated attorney-client privilege. But Judge Hoffman overruled him, and Chen began reading the messages aloud.
The courtroom was dead silent as the jury heard Natalie's own words describing the assault and the cover-up that followed. Her admission that there had been so much blood, her acknowledgement that I was showing clear symptoms of brain injury, her calculated decision to participate in the gaslighting rather than ensure I received proper medical care. I watched the jurors' faces as Chen read each message, and I could see the exact moment when they understood what had really happened. This wasn't a family accident or a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate assault followed by a coordinated cover-up that had put my life at risk. When Jake Patterson, Natalie's boyfriend, took the stand to authenticate the messages, the damage was complete. Under oath, he confirmed that the conversations were real and accurate, and that Natalie had been fully aware of the severity of my injuries from the beginning. She was really freaked out, he testified. She kept saying she could hear the sound of Sophia's head hitting the counter. She knew it was bad. Morrison's cross-examination was brutal, attacking Jake's character and suggesting he was testifying against Natalie to avoid prosecution himself. But the text messages spoke for themselves. preserved in digital amber beyond any attempts at revision or reinterpretation. The prosecution's case continued for 3 days, with witness after witness corroborating the evidence of assault and cover-up. My roommate testified about my behavior when I returned to campus, describing the headaches and confusion that my family had dismissed as stress. My professor, Dr. Chen, described my sudden academic difficulties and the conversation that had led to my visit to the health center. The campus health center physician who had ordered my CT scan testified about the severity of my symptoms and the critical importance of immediate treatment for skull fractures. Delayed treatment can result in complications ranging from permanent cognitive impairment to death, she explained. The fact that this patient went weeks without proper medical evaluation was extremely dangerous. When it was my turn to testify, I was more ready than I'd ever thought possible. Chen guided me through my story with gentle questions, allowing me to describe the assault and its aftermath in my own words. I spoke about the pain and confusion of the weeks that followed, the gaslighting that made me doubt my own memories, and the relief of finally learning the truth about what had happened to me. Morrison's cross-examination was everything Chen had prepared me for, and worse. He attacked my memory, my motives, and my character with surgical precision. Miss Torres, you've admitted to having memory problems following your injury, correct? Yes, but my memory of the assault itself is clear. Clear enough to remember exactly what your sister said before she allegedly pushed you? Yes, but not clear enough to remember whether you had been drinking that evening? I had 1 glass of wine with dinner. That's not enough to impair my memory. How can you be certain of that if your memory was affected by your injury? The questions went on for hours, each one designed to chip away at my credibility. Morrison suggested I was motivated by jealousy of my sister's success, that I was seeking attention and sympathy, that I was using a tragic accident to destroy my family for personal gain. But I held firm. Every attack he made, every suggestion that I was lying or delusional, was answered with the simple truth. I knew what had happened to me, and I deserved justice for it. The defense case was brief and increasingly desperate. Morrison called my parents to testify, and their performance was everything Chen had hoped for. Under oath, they stuck to their story about the wet floor and the accidental fall, but their testimony only highlighted the contradictions and implausibilities in their narrative. Mom broke down on the stand when Chen cross-examined her about the text messages, sobbing as she tried to explain why she had discouraged me from seeing a doctor despite clear evidence that I was seriously injured. I thought she was okay, she cried. I checked her pupils, I monitored her symptoms, I thought she just needed rest. Mrs. Torres, you were a nurse before your children were born, correct? Yes. So you would have known the signs of serious head trauma. Yes. And you would have known that confusion, persistent headaches, and memory problems are red flags requiring immediate medical attention? Yes, but you chose to interpret those symptoms as stress rather than brain injury. I didn't want to overreact. Or did you not want to deal with the questions that would arise if your daughter received proper medical treatment? Morrison objected, but the damage was done. Mom's testimony have revealed the calculated nature of the medical neglect, not maternal concern for my well-being. Dad's testimony was even worse. His anger, barely contained throughout the proceedings, erupted during cross-examination when Chen pressed him about his immediate construction of the accident narrative. You told your daughter she had slipped before she was even fully conscious, didn't you? I told her what happened. How could you know what happened if you weren't in the kitchen when the incident occurred? I heard the noise. I came running. I saw my daughter on the floor. And you immediately decided it was an accident? It was obvious what happened. Was it obvious or was it convenient? How dare you suggest? Mr. Torres, did your family discuss what to tell people about your daughter's injury? The question hung in the air as Dad struggled to control his temper. Finally, he admitted that they had coordinated their story to avoid unnecessary drama. When Natalie finally took the stand in her own defense, I wasn't sure what to expect. The confident young woman I'd grown up with seemed to have disappeared entirely, replaced by someone who looked fragile and lost. Morrison guided her through a careful recounting of the events, portraying her as a young woman who had made a terrible mistake in a moment of anger,
but who was being unfairly persecuted for what was essentially an accident. I pushed her, Natalie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I was angry and I pushed her, but I never meant for her to get hurt. I would never hurt my sister on purpose. She described the weeks that followed as a nightmare of guilt and confusion, claiming that she had gone along with our parents' version of events because she was scared and didn't know what else to do. I knew she was hurt, she said, tears streaming down her face. But Mom and Dad said she was okay, that it was just a bump. I wanted to believe that because the alternative was too horrible to think about. It was a compelling performance, and I could see several jurors looking sympathetic. Morrison had coached her well, presenting her as a scared young woman who had made a series of bad decisions, rather than someone who had deliberately assaulted her sister and participated in a calculated cover-up. But then Chen rose for cross-examination, and Natalie's carefully constructed narrative began to crumble. Miss Torres, you testified that you never meant to hurt your sister, is that correct? Yes. But you admit you pushed her with enough force to send her backward into the kitchen island? Yes. And you knew immediately that she was seriously injured? I knew she'd hit her head. According to your text messages to your boyfriend, you knew there was so much blood, correct? Natalie's composure began to crack. Yes. And you described the sound of her head hitting the counter as like a coconut cracking? I was upset. I was scared. Scared enough to research her symptoms online? I wanted to make sure she was okay. But when your research confirmed that she was showing signs of serious brain injury, you didn't encourage her to see a doctor, did you? Mom and Dad said, I'm asking what you did, Miss Torres. When you knew your sister was showing symptoms of brain injury, did you tell her she needed medical attention? No. Did you tell your parents that she needed immediate medical care? No. Did you tell anyone the truth about what had happened? No. Instead, you watched your brain-injured sister struggle with headaches, confusion, and memory problems while you participated in convincing her that she was imagining things. I didn't know what else to do. You could have told the truth. I was scared.
Scared of what? Scared of facing consequences for your actions? Morrison objected, but Chen pressed on, methodically destroying Natalie's claim that she had been an unwilling participant in the cover-up. Miss Torres, in your text messages, you expressed concern about how this incident might affect your future, correct? Yes. Your scholarship? Yes. Your internship? Yes. So when you chose not to tell the truth about your sister's injuries, you were protecting your own future rather than ensuring her medical care? The question hung in the air as Natalie struggled to find an answer that wouldn't damn her completely. Finally, she whispered, I was scared. Scared enough to let your sister suffer rather than face the consequences of what you'd done? You didn't think what, Miss Torres? You didn't think she deserved medical attention? You didn't think the truth mattered? You didn't think she was worth more than your scholarship? By the time Chen finished with her, Natalie was sobbing uncontrollably, her carefully constructed image of remorseful victim completely shattered. The jury had seen her for what she really was, someone who had put her own interests above her sister's life and health, and who was sorry only because she'd been caught. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following Monday, giving both sides a weekend to prepare their final presentations to the jury. I spent that weekend in a strange state of suspended animation, simultaneously exhausted from the week of testimony and anxious about what was to come. Chen met with me Saturday morning to prepare for the closing arguments and to discuss what might happen next. How do you think it went? I asked. Better than I hoped, she admitted. The text messages were devastating, and your sister's testimony under cross-examination showed the jury exactly who she really is. But we can't get overconfident. Morrison is good at what he does, and he only needs to create reasonable doubt in one juror's mind. What are the chances of conviction? On the assault charge? Very good. The evidence is overwhelming. On the conspiracy charges for your parents? Harder to predict. They'll likely be convicted of something, but the sentences might be lighter. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching the solemn mood in the courtroom as both sides prepared to make their final arguments to the jury.
Morrison went first, making one last attempt to portray the case as a family tragedy blown out of proportion by overzealous prosecutors. Ladies and gentlemen, no one disputes that a terrible accident occurred in the Torres family kitchen on Thanksgiving night. No one disputes that Sophia Torres was seriously injured, and no one disputes that mistakes were made in the aftermath. But the question before you today is not whether this family handled a crisis perfectly. The question is whether the evidence supports the serious criminal charges that have been brought against them. He walked through the evidence methodically, trying to create doubt about the intentionality of the assault and the calculated nature of the cover-up. He portrayed Natalie as a scared young woman who had made poor decisions in a moment of crisis, not a criminal who had deliberately endangered her sister's life. The prosecution wants you to believe that this family sat around a table and plotted to deny medical care to their injured daughter. That's not what happened. What happened was a family in crisis, making imperfect decisions while trying to cope with a tragic accident. It was a skilled performance, and I could see some of the jurors nodding along. Morrison was good at what he did, and he was making the most of the limited facts that supported his narrative. But then Chen rose for the prosecution's closing argument, and the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. "Mr. Morrison is right about one thing," she began. "This case is about a family in crisis. But the crisis wasn't caused by an accident. It was caused by violence, and it was made infinitely worse by the deliberate decision to cover up that violence rather than ensure the victim received proper medical care." She walked through the evidence one final time, building a devastating case for conviction that left no room for doubt about what had really happened. The defendant's own words convict her. Her own text messages show that she knew exactly how badly she had injured her sister, and she chose to participate in a cover-up rather than ensure that sister received proper medical care. That's not a scared young woman making poor decisions. That's someone who values her own future more than her sister's life. She addressed the conspiracy charges against my parents directly, describing their immediate construction of an alternative narrative and their systematic efforts to prevent me from seeking medical attention. The evidence shows a coordinated effort to cover up a serious crime, phone calls between family members, consistent false statements to police, deliberate discouragement of medical treatment. This wasn't confusion or poor judgment. This was conspiracy. As Chen spoke, I watched the jurors' faces and saw the moment when the last doubts disappeared. They understood what had happened to me, and they understood that justice required accountability. Sophia Torres could have died, Chen concluded. She could have suffered permanent brain damage. Her own family was willing to let that happen rather than face the truth about what they had done. That's not family loyalty. That's criminal conspiracy, and it deserves to be punished as such. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6 hours during which I paced the courthouse hallways, checked my phone obsessively, and tried to prepare myself for every possible outcome. Chen had warned me that jury trials were unpredictable, that even strong cases could result in unexpected verdicts. When the bailiff finally announced that the jury had reached a verdict, my heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone in the courtroom must be able to hear it. I took my seat in the front row, my hands clenched so tightly that my nails left marks in my palms. Judge Hoffman called the court to order, and the jury foreman rose to read the verdict. On the charge of assault in the second degree, we find the defendant Natalie Torres guilty. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been hoping to hear them. Guilty. After months of gaslighting and manipulation, after weeks of my family's lawyers trying to paint me as vindictive and unstable, a jury of 12 strangers had looked at the evidence and confirmed what I'd known all along. My sister had assaulted me, and she was guilty of a crime. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, we find the defendant Natalie Torres guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, we find the defendant Robert Torres guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to obstruct justice, we find the defendant Maria Torres guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant Robert Torres guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant Maria Torres guilty. The verdicts kept coming, each one confirming that the justice system had seen through my family's carefully constructed lies and recognized the truth of what had happened to me. When the foreman finished reading, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of my mother sobbing. I turned to look at my family and saw Dad sitting ramrod straight, his face a mask of controlled fury. Natalie had collapsed into her chair, her face buried in her hands. Only Marcus looked directly at me, and when our eyes met, he mouthed the words, "I'm sorry." Judge Hoffman scheduled sentencing for the following month and dismissed the jury with thanks for their service. As the courtroom began to empty, I found myself surrounded by reporters asking for comments, but I couldn't speak. The relief was overwhelming, mixed with grief for the family relationships that had been destroyed and uncertainty about what came next. Chen guided me through the media gauntlet and into a small conference room where we could talk privately. "How do you feel?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Relieved, I guess, but also sad. I never wanted this to happen." "You didn't make this happen, Sophia. They did. You just had the courage to demand accountability." The sentencing hearing 4 weeks later was much smaller than the trial had been. Most of the media attention had moved on to other stories, and the courtroom was filled mainly with family members and court personnel. Judge Hoffman had clearly given careful thought to the sentences, taking into account both the severity of the crimes and the family dynamics that had contributed to them. Natalie received 2 years in state prison for the assault and conspiracy charges, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. It was less than the maximum sentence, but more than Morrison had hoped for in his plea negotiations. My parents each received 1 year in county jail and 3 years of probation for their conspiracy and endangerment convictions. They would also be required to pay restitution for my medical expenses and ongoing treatment costs. Before imposing the sentences, Judge Hoffman addressed each of them directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Torres, as parents, you had a fundamental obligation to protect your daughter's health and safety.
Instead, you chose to protect yourselves and your other daughter from the consequences of a serious crime. Your actions put Sophia's life at risk and denied her the medical care she desperately needed. That is a betrayal of the most basic parental duty." To Natalie, she was even more direct. "Miss Torres, you assaulted your sister with sufficient force to fracture her skull, then participated in a cover-up that denied her proper medical care for weeks. Your own words in text messages show that you understood the severity of her injuries, but chose to protect yourself rather than ensure her well-being. That level of callousness toward a family member who depended on you for protection is particularly disturbing." Finally, she turned to me. "Miss Torres, I want you to know that this court recognizes your courage in coming forward and demanding accountability. Family violence is often the most difficult to prosecute because victims face enormous pressure to remain silent. Your willingness to speak the truth despite that pressure likely prevented others from suffering similar harm." As my family was led away to begin their sentences, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Justice had been served, but at an enormous cost. My family, as I had known it, was effectively destroyed. The parents who had raised me, the sister I had once looked up to, were all going to prison because of testimony I had given. But as I walked out of the courthouse that day, I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The truth was finally out. The gaslighting was over, and for the first time since that Thanksgiving night, I could trust my own memories and perceptions again. The aftermath of the trial unfolded slowly over the following months. The media attention eventually died down, though the case was covered in several national publications as an example of how family loyalty can enable serious crimes. I gave a few interviews to journalists writing about domestic violence and family assault, hoping that sharing my story might help other victims find the courage to speak up. My relationship with Marcus was the only family connection that survived intact. He visited me several times during his senior year of high school, and we slowly rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty rather than the carefully constructed lies that had defined our family for so long. "I'm sorry I didn't believe you at first," he told me during one of our conversations. "I couldn't imagine that Natalie would do something like that, or that Mom and Dad would cover it up." "You were trying to protect your family," I replied. "I understand that. But you're my family too, and I should have protected you." The restitution payments from my parents covered my ongoing medical expenses and therapy costs, allowing me to focus on healing rather than worrying about money. Dr. Wong continued to work with me on processing the trauma, not just of the assault itself, but of the family betrayal that had followed.
"How do you feel about seeing them again?" she asked, as my sister's release date approached. "I don't know if I want to see them," I admitted. The people who raised me, who I thought loved me unconditionally, were willing to let me suffer brain damage rather than face the truth about what happened. I don't know how to reconcile that with the parents I thought I had. "You don't have to reconcile it," she said gently. "You're allowed to grieve the family you thought you had while protecting yourself from the family you actually have." Natalie was released after serving 18 months of her sentence. She moved back in with our parents, who had completed their jail terms but were still on probation. According to Marcus, who maintained limited contact with them, they were all attending family therapy as part of their probation requirements. They sent me a letter about 6 months after Natalie's release. It was written on formal stationery and had clearly been crafted with legal advice, probably to avoid any admission of guilt that might affect their probation status. "Dear Sophia," it began, "we know that words cannot undo the pain our family has experienced over the past 2 years. We hope that with time and continued therapy, we might find a way to heal the divisions that have torn us apart. We love you and miss you, and we hope that someday you might find it in your heart to forgive us and allow us back into your life." It was signed by all 3 of them, but it felt hollow and calculated rather than genuine. There was no real acknowledgement of what they had done to me, no recognition of the severity of their betrayal, just a vague hope for reconciliation that seemed more about their own guilt than my well-being. I never responded to the letter. Dr. Wong and I had talked extensively about forgiveness and what it meant in the context of serious betrayal. Forgiveness, she explained, was something I could choose to do for my own peace of mind, but it didn't require me to restore relationships that had proven to be harmful. "You can forgive them for your own healing while still protecting yourself from future harm," she said. "Those aren't contradictory goals." 2 years after the trial, I graduated from college with a degree in social work, inspired in part by my experiences with Dr. Wong and the victim's advocate who had supported me through the legal process. I wanted to help other people navigate trauma and find their own paths to healing. My graduation was a quiet affair. Marcus came, along with Dr. Martinez and a few close friends I had made during my recovery. It wasn't the family celebration I had once imagined, but it was meaningful in its own way. During the ceremony, as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I thought about the journey that had brought me to that moment. The assault and cover-up had nearly destroyed me, but they had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood up to my entire family, endured months of legal battles and public scrutiny, and emerged with my integrity intact. The brain injury had healed as well as could be expected. I still dealt with occasional headaches and concentration issues, but they were manageable with medication and coping strategies. Dr. Martinez had warned me that some effects might be permanent, but I had learned to adapt and move forward. 3 years after the trial, I was working at a domestic violence shelter when I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a young woman named Sarah, whose situation reminded me powerfully of my own. "I found your name in an article about family violence," she explained. "My brother assaulted me 6 months ago, and my family is pressuring me not to press charges. They keep saying it was just a fight that got out of hand, that families should handle these things privately. But I have medical records showing he gave me a concussion, and I'm scared of what he might do next." I spent an hour on the phone with Sarah, sharing my own story and connecting her with resources that could help. It was the first of many such conversations over the years, as other victims found my name through news articles and advocacy organizations. Each conversation reminded me why I had chosen to speak up, despite the enormous personal cost. The truth had power, not just to heal my own wounds, but to help others find the courage to demand their own justice. 5 years after the trial, Marcus graduated from college and called to share the news. He had chosen to attend a school across the country, partly to establish his independence from our parents, and partly to start fresh somewhere no one knew our family story. "I'm proud of you," he told me during that call, "for everything you went through, for how you handled it. I know it wasn't easy." "It was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted, "but it was also the right thing." "Do you ever regret it? Reporting them, I mean?" I considered the question carefully. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that they put me in a position where I had to choose between justice and family loyalty. But no, I don't regret speaking up. If I hadn't, Natalie would have faced no consequences for nearly killing me, and my parents would have learned that they could cover up serious crimes without accountability. What if they had apologized? Really apologized, I mean, not the legal letter they sent. I don't know, I said honestly. Maybe things would have been different, but they chose their path just like I chose mine. As we talked, I realized that the angry, hurt young woman who had first walked into Dr. Martinez's office was gone, replaced by someone stronger and more self-aware. The trauma would always be part of my story, but it no longer defined me. 7 years after the trial, I received a wedding invitation from an old high school friend. As I was deciding whether to attend, I saw a familiar name on the guest list, Natalie Torres. My first instinct was to decline the invitation rather than risk an uncomfortable encounter. But Dr. Wong, who I still saw occasionally for maintenance sessions, encouraged me to think carefully about what I wanted to do. "You don't owe her a conversation," she said, "but if you're curious about where she is in her own healing process, this might be an opportunity to find out." I decided to attend the wedding, partly out of loyalty to my friend and partly out of curiosity about how Natalie had changed. I chose a seat near the back of the church, hoping to observe without necessarily interacting. Natalie looked different than she had during the trial. Older, obviously, but also somehow smaller and less commanding. She sat with our parents in a middle pew, all of them looking uncomfortable in the social setting where their family scandal was probably still remembered by many of the other guests. After the ceremony, during the cocktail hour, she approached me hesitantly. "Sophia, I wasn't sure you'd be here." "Hi, Natalie." We stood there for a moment in awkward silence, surrounded by the cheerful noise of wedding celebration.
I know this is probably not the right place, but I wanted to say I'm sorry, really sorry, not like the letter we sent. I was wrong about everything, and I've spent the last 7 years trying to figure out how to live with what I did to you. Her words sounded genuine in a way the family letter never had, but they also came 7 years too late to change anything fundamental about our relationship. I appreciate you saying that, I replied carefully. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. I just wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I hurt you, and not just physically. The lying, the gaslighting, watching you suffer while I protected myself, it was unforgivable. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated remorse, but what I saw looked like genuine regret and shame. What changed? I asked. Therapy, mostly. Prison was horrible, but the therapy afterward was worse in some ways because it forced me to face what I'd really done. Not just the assault, but everything that came after. I had to accept that I was capable of hurting someone I claimed to love to protect my own interests. And our parents? She shook her head sadly. They're still convinced that the real problem was you going to the police instead of handling it as a family. They've learned to say the right words in therapy, but they don't really understand what they did wrong. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, long enough for me to realize that while Natalie seemed to have genuinely changed, too much had happened for us to rebuild any kind of relationship. Some bridges, once burned, couldn't be reconstructed. I hope you're doing well, I told her as we prepared to part ways. I am, mostly. I work at a nonprofit now, doing administrative work. Nothing glamorous, but it feels honest. What about you? I'm a victim advocate now. I help people navigate situations like the one we went through. She nodded, understanding the full implications of my career choice. That makes sense. You always were the brave one in our family. As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. Natalie had finally acknowledged the full scope of what she had done to me, and she seemed to be working toward becoming a better person. That didn't mean I forgave her or wanted her back in my life, but it meant that the angry, self-protective young woman who had assaulted me was gone, replaced by someone who at least understood the gravity of her actions. 10 years after the trial, I published a book about my experiences called Breaking the Silence: A Family's Betrayal and a Survivor's Journey to Justice. It became a modest bestseller and led to speaking engagements at conferences about domestic violence and family abuse. The book opened doors to new opportunities in advocacy work, including a position with a national organization focused on supporting survivors of family violence. My own experience, painful as it had been, became a tool for helping others understand that family loyalty should never require accepting abuse or covering up crimes. During one of my speaking engagements, a young man approached me afterward with tears in his eyes.
My father broke my ribs when I was 16, he said quietly. My mother convinced me not to report it because it would destroy our family. I've been carrying that guilt for 8 years, thinking I was weak for wanting justice. You weren't weak, I told him. You were a child who deserved protection, and the adults in your life failed you. It's never too late to seek justice or healing. These conversations became the most meaningful part of my work. Each person who found the courage to speak their truth, to demand accountability from family members who had harmed them, represented a victory against the silence that enables abuse to continue. 15 years after that Thanksgiving night that changed everything, I received an unexpected call from Marcus. Our parents had been in a car accident, not serious, but serious enough to remind them of their mortality. They were asking if I would visit them in the hospital. I told them I'd pass along the message, Marcus said carefully, but I also told them that you might not be interested, and that would be completely understandable. I thought about it for several days before deciding. The people in that hospital weren't the parents who had raised me with love and care for 18 years. They were the people who had been willing to let me suffer brain damage rather than face the truth about their other daughter's crimes. But they were also aging and scared, and perhaps genuinely remorseful in a way they hadn't been capable of before. I visited them once, accompanied by Marcus for moral support. It was an awkward, painful conversation that confirmed my decision to maintain distance from them. They expressed regret for how everything worked out, but still seemed unable to fully acknowledge their deliberate choices or understand why those choices had been so devastating. We were trying to protect our family, Mom said, as if that explanation justified endangering my life. I was part of your family too, I replied quietly. But when you had to choose between protecting me and protecting Natalie from consequences, you chose her. The visit lasted an hour and ended with polite goodbyes rather than tearful reconciliation. As Marcus and I left the hospital, he asked how I felt about seeing them. Sad, I admitted. Not angry anymore, just sad that they still don't understand what they took from me. Not just my health or my trust, but the family I thought I belonged to. Do you think you'll see them again? Probably not. There's nothing left to say. 20 years after the trial, I was invited to testify before a congressional committee about family violence and the barriers that prevent victims from seeking justice. It was surreal to sit in a hearing room in Washington, D.C., sharing my story with lawmakers and advocates from across the country. Family violence is uniquely devastating because it violates the fundamental assumption that our families are our safe haven. When the people who are supposed to protect us become the ones we need protection from, it creates a kind of trauma that extends far beyond the physical injuries. I talked about the gaslighting, the social pressure to keep family business private, and the way family loyalty is often weaponized to silence victims. I shared statistics about prosecution rates for family violence and the long-term effects on survivors who never receive justice. My case was unusual because I had clear medical evidence and digital proof of the cover-up, I explained. Most family violence victims don't have smoking gun evidence. They have to rely on their own testimony against family members who will deny everything and paint them as unstable or vindictive. The committee members asked thoughtful questions about legislation that might better protect family violence victims and ensure they have access to justice. It was gratifying to see my personal trauma transformed into policy discussions that might help future victims. After the hearing, I was approached by other survivors who had traveled to D.C. to share their own stories with lawmakers. Each conversation reminded me that my decision to speak up 20 years earlier had ripple effects far beyond my own healing. "Your book saved my life," one woman told me. "It helped me understand that my brother's violence wasn't my fault and that my parents' cover-up was a crime too. These moments made all the pain and struggle worthwhile. Every person who found courage in my story, every family that chose truth over convenient lies, every victim who received justice instead of silence, they represented the real victory." 25 years after that Thanksgiving night, I was married to a wonderful man who understood my history and supported my work. We had built a life together based on honesty and mutual respect, the kind of relationship I had once thought was impossible after experiencing such profound betrayal from my own family. Our wedding was small and intimate, attended by chosen family rather than biological relatives. Marcus walked me down the aisle, having become the brother I could trust and depend on. Dr. Wong and Dr. Martinez were there. The women who had helped me find my voice and demand justice. My colleagues from the advocacy organization sat alongside friends I had made in my journey toward healing. As I stood at the altar, promising to love and honor the man who had chosen to build a life with me, I thought about the scared, confused young woman I had been 25 years earlier. She could never have imagined the life I was living now, the meaningful work, the genuine relationships, the peace that came from knowing I had fought for truth and won. The trauma would always be part of my story, but it was no longer the defining chapter. I had transformed my pain into purpose, my silence into service to others. After the reception, as my husband and I drove away to begin our honeymoon, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment. The path had been painful and difficult, marked by loss and betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. But it had also been a path toward truth, justice, and ultimately healing. The young woman who had chosen to speak up instead of staying silent, who had demanded accountability instead of accepting family loyalty as an excuse for violence, had grown into someone I was proud to be. The decision to call Dr. Martinez that night 25 years ago, to tell the truth despite enormous pressure to stay quiet, remained the most important choice I had ever made. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. And sometimes doing the right thing is the only way to find your way home to yourself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.